Yeah, I had a pothead joke lined up,
But
but
I ranted for so long.
but you no, but you said something much more important later that that triggered a thought, which is that idea of that about the expression of art and the craft, because you might most likely would know World of Warcraft launched Classic recently, right? And
Hmm.
people say, well, Classic is way better than the version 15 years later, etc. Now, I play Classic. I probably put in a few hundred hours into that, and what was really surprising to me is that was not an MVP product at all. It had so many things. They didn't launch one little zone and see how it went. They launched a bunch of factions, a bunch of classes. All the quests are there. The PvP systems were there. And
Hmm.
later on, the new expansions were just changing the 20% end game on top of that. And it's really not a safe move to launch the game, World of Warcraft. It was the game. The developers and designers thought, we want to create our dream. We had some success, we had some resources, so that's very promising. Let's create a dream, and then and their vision was to create the most epic experience possible. And then now the complaint is that Blizzard has shifted more into a CFO driven culture, which is more about, oh, we spend $10 now, can we make this $10 back within 1 or 2 quarters? And the decision back to that, not seen as an art form, but more of a science, or you talk about something about engineering,
Yeah,
how to get monetary returns from that activity. And then it's just a lot less inspiring for the players.
it is, because now it's on a treadmill. When you play the game that there will 18 months, 2 years, there will be another expansion. You know that all this time that you're spending in the raids trying to get the best gear and everything, that gear will be worth nothing the moment the new expansion comes out. And people are wised up to that. When the game originally came out, I mean, it came out as a fully fledged uh, coherent piece of software. And the expansions that followed, they were pretty good. They to start with, because they built on what was there rather than starting to introduce little gimmicks to try and get people to play. I mean, there were some little gimmicks, but on the whole, they were quite good. I played World of Warcraft for whatever 24 times 240 or something is in hours. Slash played of around that kind of 240 days, something like that. So I played it extensively. And I stopped when Mr. Pandaria came out. I thought, no, I'm not that. This is it's just same old, same old. There's no point in looking at this anymore, because they'd already exposed the fact that they didn't understand their players when they brought out the Karajan dungeon, which was a guild breaker, and it was obvious to any game designer that was a guild breaker. And they put it in and didn't spot it. I thought, oh well, either they put junior designers on this who are learning the trade, or the people in charge of it don't really care.
They
Or want to.
miscalculated because people didn't have smartphones back then.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, the original game is, yeah, it's quite good. I mean, when I say quite good, it's very good. There are some things about it I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't have had so many of the references to real world content that players seem to like, but it breaks the immersion. Like a statue in of the gnome that looks like the one in Rio de Janeiro. I mean, and it's even called Janeiro because they're ripping off down in whatever it is, Booty Bay. That one's, I mean, that's an example of one of many references to the real world. Now, if you're going to make references to the real world and you're being artistic about it, you're doing it to say something about the real world. If you're doing it just because you think it's clever, well, it's what it shows is kind of a lack of imagination. There are some parts of World of Warcraft, the original, that are absolutely beautifully designed. I mean, really, really well done. not necessarily the parts that the players like, but other parts. I mean, the whole Stranglethorn Vale is a work of art in itself, because it is actually saying something to the players, not that the players would pick up on it. The player just moan because they're getting attacked by the other faction. But the whole area of that is, I mean, it's superb in terms of what it's saying. The way it, well, I mean, I'll rant about it, ramble about it if you like, but
no,
but
this is all very, very interesting. And I think it takes a certain advanced player, a game designer, to read in on the story people want to tell in a zone, and especially connect the real. I think most people do the grinding, the level up, the achieving. I see a little bit of explorer there, you know, in terms of trying to find all the things this place is telling me. Right? Maybe you have a more of explorer drive in you. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agreeing with you. Yes, this isn't to say that players can't do it. It's just that players don't do it. You know, it's like if you read a book, you can look for all the subtext, and if you trust the author, then you may find the subtext. But if the author hasn't put any in, then you're looking for symbols that aren't there, and you're overreading it. And in some MMOs, it really is the case that the designer hasn't put anything in. There is nothing special, and you're looking for a message that's not there because the designer really hasn't thought about it. They're not a game designer; they're a designer of games. But sometimes you do see it, and I mean, it's obvious that some things are there for a particular purpose. Like there was that in Stranglethorn Vale, was that whole, what was it, green leaves or something like that of Stranglethorn, basically teach people to use the auction house. And that was, you could see why it was there, you could see what it was doing, but it, and it was necessary, but it didn't really work in that it was not a lot of fun. I mean, they could have done that in more fun ways, perhaps. And I'm pretty sure the designer of that recognized it, but the players certainly recognized that it wasn't fun, but they didn't recognize it was there to teach them how to use the auction house unless they were quite sophisticated players. The problem you have is the more analysis you do of a game, the more you see the wizard behind the curtain, and the less fun the game becomes to play. It becomes more fun as an intellectual exercise, so it becomes more designer fun than player fun, if you see.
That's like seeing a lot of magic tricks. You know, I think there's two types of audience. One, the ones that are just like, wow, it's so cool, it's so I don't know how they do it, and they're entertained. Then there's the people like me, probably you, that just, how do they do that? I got to figure this out. I got to replay this. I got to figure this out, right? And then, but ultimately, no one wins when the magician reveals the trick, because you know, they look lame, and then everyone sees, oh, that's stupid, and no one is that entertained anymore. So sometimes good to have a bit of mystery around that game design. If you trust their motives to begin with, that they are trying to inspire you or give you a good time. And I think one interesting point that you made, I say good because all your points are good. So that's, but one also on top of the good point, one interesting point you made is about people can go and go deep into thinking about these. And I think that boils back into your player types, which is everyone can do all these activities, but people choose to do one activity over another because of what drives them more, what motivates them further. So, and I think the final note on the World of Warcraft, we'll probably move back. We'll move to Mud, actually. But World of Warcraft is, I think, my analogy about the shifts in their design is that it kind of went from, let's say, casino going from a lot of poker games, right? A lot of strategy, people are creative, and suddenly it's all slot machine games, which, you know, that's a more efficient way to just get money out of people. Just pull the bar.
Well, yeah, you see this in lots of industries. This was explained to me once quite well by an Australian academic whom I met in Hong Kong, and he said this is the Mazda MX-5 sports car. So you start off in the 1960s, you've got all these sports cars that are coming out, and they're small, they're two-seaters, they're fast, they're maneuverable, they've got high acceleration, they're a joy to ride. People love them. But after a while, everybody who wants a sports car has got a sports car. So you think, how am I going to make more people buy sports cars? So you start adding extra features. So, well, some of them are good, like seatbelts. Other ones are better, things like power steering. But then when you start making them wider, making them a bit heavier, adding extra seats in the back, then you start giving them a solid roof and raising the driving position. And before long, because you're trying to widen your audience, you've had to dumb down what a sports car is. And eventually the sports car manufacturers found that their cars were competing with their saloon cars. So because of that, people thought, well, sports cars, they were just a 1960s fad. But what had happened was that the desire for driving sports cars hadn't gone away. It's just there were no sports cars to buy except second-hand ones. And when Mazda, the Japanese company, were looking for a new car to bring out, one of the ideas that they had was, I think a British engineer, was why don't we do a sports car? Because there's all these people who used to like sports cars, but there isn't anything like that now. So they went out, they did the studies, they found what it was that people wanted in a sports car, and then they made one, the MX-5, and it became the best-selling sports car in the world. So what happened was we had this level of desire for these things, but there was only a small number of people wanted it. And then as that reduced, they had to lower the curve to spread the audience, but that diluted what the product was because they needed to attract people who weren't particularly interested in everything to do with sports cars. And it's like this with MMOs. When they started off, they were much more hardcore than they are now. The hardcore players today would have been called Care Bears in 2000. I mean, it's so the games, they had to dilute the product in order to attract more audience, but in so doing lost their hardcore, who are now going off playing Dota and other things. But it's only when you reintroduce what the essence of what the virtual world is that they'll come back. And that's what Blizzard did. Well, not Blizzard so much, but they because it was being done by players who had built their own second servers. But Blizzard, to their credit, took the idea and said, okay, well, we'll give you what you want. And that's why now when you go back to it, it seems so much more authentic than in the past, because they haven't diluted it by more and more and more expansions, each one of them making the game easier and easier and easier and easier.
Well, the irony is that, like you said, they made it more Care Bear friendly to appeal to a broader audience. But I think the highest user base they've ever had was in Wrath of Lich King. So they try to appeal to more people, but they actually end up having less users or less players.
Well, and that was a good expansion. I did like that expansion.
Yeah, so Wrath was great, and then I think it was after Wrath that they started introducing more things in response to player complaints and made it easier and easier, and you don't have to socialize anymore. You click buttons and you get what you want. And I think, and it's like, wow, more people obviously enjoy this, but then it became less meaningful. Hence, actually less players cared about this game over other games that felt more meaningful, right?